Hello.
Hey, there's an interesting incident going on now. I don't know if you noticed, but GitLab pages and registry are down and
Uh,
essentially making all of the builds fail because registry's down.
mm. Yeah, so something like seems like Google's not behaving. Mhm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What is it? 3 yes, 4 no. Waiting on Adam.
The doc says that you're not present in your agenda item.
That's the one after this.
Oh, that's me. I'm reading the wrong section. Okay.
I think yeah, Pat wants to be involved in the discussion, I think. Okay, shall we start? Chan says, does Sharding plan to take care of CI issues or do we want CI to take care of it? I think what creates it is correct. We want CI to do it.
Yeah, I think it's not feasible that we take care of basically all issues that come out of this. There's just going to be too much work, I think.
I think there's also like the importance of education too, because if we just tackle too many things ourselves, then the other teams may not actually understand what we're doing, and they may be making concurrent changes that cause problems for us. Um, and in general, they just need to understand the architecture, especially the CI team is going to need to understand the architecture.
I'm actually I talked like with Zagos recently about like the CI issues, and basically like our plan is like that CI team gonna be doing most of them with us helping in some cases and kind of learning as well like how to do it. And maybe like really like our effort there would be more about helping and documenting how to solve that, because this is I think pretty important for the rest of the team, for the rest of the GitLab.
Should we have a place where we start documenting patterns? Because there's a bunch of them from issues that I've already done where it's like, okay, the pattern here is add a project ID column and denormalize the data with a migration, and the pattern here is remove this join because it's actually a redundant join, and so on. Where would be a good place to put these patterns down? Just in docs, we could put it in the handbook, but maybe that'll be too slow to update compared to an issue that this has
Do we,
comments.
so like do we have like this documentation entry? I think we have done that you added multiple databases, right?
Yeah, I put it on the slash databases in
Can
the
we,
docs.skillat.com.
I mean like because like for example we still have these like ones about like if you fetch IDs, how many you fetch them. I think we didn't resolve that yet, how to solve that, but maybe I don't know, like just having like the issue or just like putting like example of the problem, maybe we don't yet like how to solve that or like proposing some solution for that. Because like I think we have like a different class of the problems. One like on breaking cross joins. Second one gonna be related to handling many databases from the migration point of view, and like just connecting things. So basically, and like dealing with many databases. So this is also kind of like what you, Yorick, now focusing on. And the third one, is there a third one? I think these are probably like two main paths. How to break cross joins. Oh, actually there are third path. First one is like how to break cross joins. Second one is how to deal like with many databases supported in the application and like what the consequences it has. And the third path is really like how to deal with the foreign keys and relations and removal of the entries. This is, I think, like the three main aspects that we need to document.
Okay, so I think we just extend the docs that Tong added then, and we just add headings for the different topics you talked about. Foreign keys, I think, there's already an issue that somebody in the team will pick up at some point to do that. And I can probably add the cross-join examples that I have from real examples.
I mean, the doc site was up now.
Is it this problem with the load balancer on the GCS? I think so.
Yeah, they think it's that. Something. Okay, IBM is the next point. I think lots of us responded to that already. So we don't have them. The new is the third one.
Yes, I'm kind of like wondering, like there is like a lot of concurrent stuff that we're working on. What is like your perception of like how we are doing on this complex project? Like anything?
I can start. I mean, I think overall we're sort of slowly ramping up. I think my main concern is that from sort of upper management, like we started at a sharding, then became decomposition. Now there's these concerns about, oh, what about Shopify pods? What about regions? Basically, all these extra concerns are added. And it is somewhat understandable, but at the same time, you basically end up with like a always growing scope that you have to take into account. It just becomes a little, I think, confusing and difficult to determine, like, okay, what are we actually eventually supposed to deliver at this point? Because it seems I would say the desires sort of keep changing.
Yeah, I have the same concerns a lot about, constant upper management asking for various different things. One of the things I was starting to notice is maybe that as a team, we're being forced to be very agreeable with each other in order to present like a unified front towards senior leadership of the company, because like we're trying to convince them of a particular path that we want to go down. And so we're working to like constantly have a unified narrative. And this may be creating the impression that we don't have enough disagreement in our team, or we're not challenging each other enough in the team. So it was kind of one thing I was thinking today is like, we should make sure we are vocally and publicly challenging when we disagree with each other, so that it is apparent externally that we're not just all agreeing and going with one objective right now.
I'm trying to like grasp like your
I
comments.
can write this down myself, but one of the things that I observed is that when you have the senior leadership at the company saying we want to do one thing, and all of us as a team kind of thinking that's not the right way to go, then we're being asked by managers to present like a unified front. All of us have to present, this is how we believe we should go forward. We all have to agree on it to senior leadership so that they can see that this is the right way to go. But that might have the exact opposite, creating the exact opposite problem where people in the company just think that we're all agreeing with each other. And that's why I think it's important for us to actually disagree with each other and be public about that, so that it's clear that we are a team of engineers that are going to challenge the ideas of each other.
Okay, I think I get it. I think it's not that bad that we are agreeing on everything, because we are not agreeing on everything. There are at least some cases that we are not agreeing on. But I actually like about the extra scope. I think this is pretty like apparent to me, and like I was really like frustrated because of that at some point, that like we keep discussing about sharding regions and all of that. But I think what I learned recently is like that this is something to be thought concurrently as a direction, but it doesn't change our work. Like we still like do the composition, we focus on that. It may be slightly defocusing for us, like to like even be joined into this conversation, but like the direction that we decided some time ago on the decomposition of the CI, it's still like something that we are executing. There are just concurrent discussions about like the next steps or like concurrent steps, depending on how you look at that. And sharding, I know that Atistan is looking at, hey, can we like build a team that's gonna take 2 years to build a support in Vitess? Regions, hey, what is actually like the product goal for having regions, how this should work, and how we would go around executing that. So I think right now we are kind of faced with these questions, and they are kind of distracting. But like our decomposition plan is still like fully supported and fully valid to do. It's distracting because we keep like changing the focus to think about I guess maybe the next or concurrent step. This was I mean like this was one of my worries, but it was actually like kind of rephrased on Monday meetings between Sid, Anop, Fabian, I think Craig, that like we continue with the direction of the decomposition. There are like some concerns about like whether we can do sharding, how we would do regions, but it still doesn't change like what we decided. We still continue the composition, and we're gonna kind of iterate on these problems at the appropriate time.
Yeah, we're definitely being consistently asked the same question that we've already answered 3 months ago and then 6 months before that, and it is kind of getting annoying. But at least the messaging is clear that we should just keep working while concurrently answering the same question we've already answered multiple times. But we're not getting results without answers, so there is something going wrong with how we're communicating right now.
Yeah, I'm sensing that there is a little bit of a translation, translation/relay problem here. Like I see words like, let's look at the second point. There is considerable concern from Sid. Like, I don't know how true that is. Like, what is considerable? Is that considerable enough that we're gonna abandon decomposition? Probably not. But you know, so it's really hard to know what the context is. And I thought that was already resolved last month, but yeah, so hard to know.
Yeah, I think the sort of overarching theme, so to say, of my concerns is that based on these sort of ever-changing desires and questions, it kind of creates the feeling that management basically doesn't trust our decisions. Because it started with basically, you know, we want you to do sharding, and we have determined that, you know, that is necessary. And then we came in and basically we're like, well, not really. And we had this sort of big, let's say, struggle to have that changed. And then we ended up with this decomposition idea. And now it's like, oh, but what about regions? What about Shopify pods? What about this? You know, this concerns that. It's kind of frustrating sense that I sometimes think in my own head, it's like, okay, if people apparently at least come across as don't trusting it when we say, look, we don't need this, why don't they do it themselves? That's sort of the point I'm kind of reaching in my head. Of course, I know the answer as to why, but it's a bit worrying that what two months in, it at least still creates this feeling that when we say, hey, we do or don't need this, people keep second guessing it. And it's also starting to feel a bit like a case of what's the term, whataboutism, basically. It's like, we do this, yeah, oh, but what about this? Oh, well, what about that? What if, we do this? Yeah, I don't know exactly what's going on there.
To me, I spent initially a lot of time thinking about it, but now I'm just ignoring it. So don't know whether that's helpful or not. My concern is that we're probably at the kind of a critical junction where we're starting to fan out teams, but we don't have a stable kind of list. We don't have a stable set of features that the teams or people who are not familiar can try things out. So I think this is related to your question about documentation. So I think that documentation would be enormously helpful. In the absence of, say, a development guide to set things up locally, or even working CI to test out multiple databases. So that's sort of where I'm at mostly.
Yeah, I think similar to that point, we don't have a branch for people to validate that their change fixes problems either. So we're fanning out work. The validation people will get that their changes actually work will be from us reviewing their code and saying, yeah, that's right. But that's probably not as satisfying to a developer as actually saying, okay, I see a test fail and now I see a test pass, and we don't have that environment for people. So what I think we probably want to do soon to get that kind of product, that environment for people, would be that we actually have, like, a test that you can run locally. You can set an environment variable for RSpec and you can see the same failures we're seeing in our POC branch, or however we want to organize that. But we see the test fail in the POC branch, but it won't be failing in master. So farming that out to people, it's hard for them to actually validate their fixed problems. But yeah, documentation can help them, examples how to fix problems, but it's not quite the same as a concrete test failing or passing. So that's what I feel like a next step needs to be, actually us merging some of this, whether it's static analysis or dynamic analysis or something, into master, so that we can have a more concrete place to point people to say, this is what you have to fix and this is why.
Yeah.
My general sentiment for how we're doing, though, other point to respond to your question, Camille, is that I feel like it is taking us quite a while to get. We're still not at the point where it's obvious what the first thing we're going to deliver is, and it's a little bit stressful thinking about how long the time horizons are for this project before we can actually deliver something. The schemas seem, if we weren't going with the schemas route, which is a whole other separate conversation, it seems like we might have something we can deliver sooner, but yeah, anyway, that's.
So then my question would be, how we will approach that to exactly know what to deliver first? Because like I think like right now, like we are in this tricky phase that like we kind of have POC in pretty decent shape. We kind of doing small things, but now like we need to figure out exactly the ordering of the things and like what to do and like what to start merging, because I think like it's becoming pretty important that we keep merging changes. Yorick is doing pretty decent job of that, but like I think we've been kind of focusing mostly more on this holistic POC. So likely we kind of need to switch our gears to be more on the actual, I don't know, splitting phase of this POC.
Did we ever identify any table or small set of CI tables that we will be able to move across databases with relative ease? Or is it like a case of all or nothing? Because I think if we can ship just one table with some data. Sorry?
So like we have the CI instance variable, and this is the single table that doesn't have any data on the production, but it's enough to test the actual application working.
Right. Yeah, and that in that case, considering the table's empty, yeah, it seems like a reasonable starting point, and yeah, maybe a second table that does have some data, but just so that we can show, hey, we have a table on a different database. And of course, quote unquote, just is, oh, it's not that easy, of course. Because I wonder if having maybe just one or two tables isolated might help ease the concerns from management. So then we can show this is what it would look like. Here's how we would use it. And I think that it's ultimately more useful in determining is this idea good or not than sort of speculating about it in Google Docs. Kind of similar to the classic, people discussing some feature and getting locked, and then somebody coming and is like, hey, here's a patch, it does it. And people go, oh, okay, this or that. But I suspect that even that empty table is probably going to take us, from today, let's say, probably a month or two at least. Because it's just, I think just the fact of getting the infrastructure side set up and coordinating that, yeah, can easily take quite some time.
Yeah, it's like the main blocker for even trying out this table right now is like omnibus configuration. But actually we kind of moved that forward, and like it's actually right now being worked on by the distribution. But there is this whole infrastructure side that I think we are pretty far away from being able to connect.
So is it possible that we perhaps bypass all of the distribution stuff, as in so if the approach we're taking now is that we sort of take a I would say top-down approach, like we start with the application code, then we do distribution, GDK, etc. Then we go to infrastructure. What if we flip it around, where we basically ask whoever will be in charge of this, like, hey, give us an extra database cluster, call it CI. It needs one primary, and let's say for start just one secondary, keep it simple. Set that up, PG bouncer, everything. And then we would basically manually make it like move tables over. We have to find a way that we can bypass the change request process, because that will easily add days to even the most trivial tasks. But the end goal is there, hey, let's essentially focus on the two things we can control and do, which is infrastructure and the code. Anything in between, like distribution, GDK, etc., we probably have to get more people involved. And at that point, it might take a month at least. Whereas in this approach, we can say, hey, it is a hack as to how we have set things up. It is not something you can run with customers. It's perhaps not even something you can do easily in development. But here's what it would look like. And I think especially if you start with empty tables or small tables, we don't necessarily even need to keep them in sync. It can just be a matter of, well, they need to be in sync if you actually deploy this to production, of course. But if it's just a sort of way of highlighting how it would look like, we can even just copy them manually one time. So in other words, I'm essentially advocating for let's take a slightly more cowboy coding approach to the infrastructure side so that we can get something up and running that we can actually show.
I'm not sure if we have to like cut this corner, because I saw that at least Valve is right now looking at the omnibus configuration. So maybe it's really like that we are just a few weeks away on like getting this properly configurable. But Dylan, I'm kind of, this is more like the question to you and our SRE stable counterpart. Like, I think right now, like the biggest challenge is like having the capacity on the infra to actually to provision that. And this is something that takes quite an amount of time.
Yeah, I think they're working on actually creating better automated tooling to deploy database clusters. But yeah, we discussed the CI instance variables in a call like a couple of weeks ago, and I don't know if we made a firm decision on it, but one of the things we said is the actual migration plan to move all tables is a big bang migration where we're actually going to replicate the whole database, including non-CI tables, split it off at some point, and then just have stale data sitting around for irrelevant tables in the two different databases. That's how we're going to do the migration, because when you're moving 50% of the data, it's easier to move 100% of the data using Postgres stream replication. And so we don't actually have a plan to migrate table by table. And then so we kind of were talking about this the other day. If we do CI instance variables, whatever work we do for that is going to need to be partly unwound when we go down this migration route. And it's kind of hard to see the trade-off here. If we actually want to do CI instance variables, it would really have to be clear what the benefit of that is. The benefit is not performance, but the benefit may be helping us remain productive in the short term. Like there could be other benefits, but yeah.
I mean, like for me, the benefit of just deploying something and using many databases is like better testing many databases support. And like there is like a bunch of the associated problems with that, like the pooling size, recovery, management of the configuration, monitoring of the Postgres instances. And this is something that could be really then be worked on by us and the infra team to anticipate like these kind of full-fledged migrations. So it's not really like performance, and I completely agree with that. It's more like that, I guess, validation or like preparation for the big migration. This is where you would kind of leverage the second database.
And that's fine if we're going to do that. I think it's still okay, just recognizing we'll be rolling back some of that stuff. We'll still get a lot of the configuration benefits and whatever we learn through out of that. But we'll be rolling back the actual migration of it so that we can migrate it properly alongside all the other CI tables.
Yeah, so I think like what is crucial right now, let's kind of like spend later today on deciding on the what we do with the structures and schemas, because if we lock on this decision, I think this will also kind of make it easier to figure out how useful if we run another database will be, because we may kind of have, I don't know, the single table or many tables and structures, because there's like this whole process about also running migrations in many databases. That's something that we need to kind of anticipate and work like with the delivery. So like this whole process of the migrations and rollbacks, managing them. And like we still haven't figured out exactly how we want to deal with these structures, consistency, foreign keys, schemas, and if we can somehow like decide on that today, I think it will kind of give us a stream of the work related to the database structure and how to deal with that, and how we're gonna deal that with the from the delivery side of things as well.
In regards to the migration process, did we, I mean, probably did, look into the option of only migrating a subset of tables using the logical replication feature. Because I think if we use streaming replication, from what I remember, we also replicate all the table bloat. Whereas if we use logical replication, we don't. So we get this nice space savings of, years of migrating tables, basically. I don't know to what extent those savings will be.
Yeah, I think the how you restore your database initially would result in would impact what kind of bloat you carry over, and in terms of how do you restore the CI tables from a snapshot in time? If you want to restore the exact file system of all of Postgres, then you'll get all of the tables. You could still use logical replication from then on to only replicate the updates to the CI tables. But if you did it that way, you would get the same bloat that you had that you were from the database that you restored from, because you were storing from the file system level. If you were to restore record by record, that would be a very, very complicated process and a very time-consuming process, I think, in order for us to get the clean database. But that's still orthogonal to logical replication. Well, we would have to use logical replication from then on out if we did that. But we did discuss logical replication. We basically ruled it out because it's more complicated to implement. It's new infrastructure, new tooling we need to understand. Logical replication can replicate the DDL statements, but it can't replicate schema changes. So we need to be very deliberate and careful about how long we're running logical replication for, because if we're running logical replication while schema changes are ongoing, you can end up with data inconsistencies. Yeah, and it's also possibly too slow for us to actually use. We haven't actually proven that we can use it at the scale of all of our CI tables being replicated record by record. It'll put considerably more pressure on the primary doing that anyway when we decode it on the primary. So we basically just ruled out and said, we know streaming replication works, we know how it works. It'll just be another replica that we're creating in production, and we'll just fail over to that replica for CI connections only. So it'll look a lot like our normal failover process that we've tested. Replication will be based on Petroni's configuration, the same way we've tested and used in the past.
I will add one more thing to that. We actually have AWS the procedure in the infrastructure that allows you to completely fork the whole cluster of your current database, fairly easy from the snapshot. So technically, from the infrastructure side setting, another cluster that is replicated from the main, it appears to be a well figured out process, and it's already automated to some extent. What is not automated is self-managing this cluster later for the purpose of the application connecting to that and having this authoritative. This is what I learned from our SRE stable counterpart, that we actually have the procedure for replicating the database cluster, and this kind of is used pretty extensively today.
Yeah, have you read the migration plan, Yorick, from C number 5?
I think I initially looked at it a while ago. I haven't looked at it recently, but the comments from Dylan about replication, they make sense. And I do think, yeah, if we use streaming replication, migrating an empty table at least is is easy, but also then you kind of reach a point okay, what's the benefit? It's an empty table. Yeah, so think about that, I guess.
Like migrating, I feel like the migration plan describes an end state. There's nothing that says that we can't have an intermediate thing where we migrate the CI instance servers, and that's a temporary state, just purely for the purposes of so that we can better test it and run all those things that can be discussed. I feel like that's something that we discussed a month back and we've stopped, probably because we're waiting on infrastructure. So the question is, do we actually still want that test or not?
It's not clear that it's not clear to me that infrastructure is prioritizing giving us a new database cluster right now, or at least Jose at the moment is prioritizing benchmarking work for us to figure out how this streaming replication is going to work and how long it's going to take and what kind of downtime we should expect. So, but yeah, if we want the CI instance variables moved over and we just want a database cluster with one replica and it doesn't really matter, configured today, then we could try to be communicating that more.
So can we maybe because I think it's kind of disruptive to change gears, and this is for everyone. Maybe we should have a goal for right now it's 14.2, the milestone, right? We kind of anticipate in the 14.2 that Omnibus and CNG can be configured. So can we kind of, let's say, expect that in the 14.3, we would connect another database to staging. And this is where we would need the infrastructure help. And maybe up to that moment, Jose actually, the team finishes what they are doing now, we have the proper configuration and we can start kind of using many databases to not change too many things at once. And for somewhere in the 14.3, we would kind of connect, I don't know, whatever we have at that point. Is it instance variable? Is it more? Or is it just another database configuration? We would just connect staging to another database. And we will just model on the application to what extent is that connection actually used.
I have a feeling that the very first question, the very first pushback is going to be, no, we want staging to be the same as production. But yes.
I mean, it has to go through staging. So anyway, so if this is the approach for the infrastructure team to start provisioning production, I'm even fine saying that okay, we're just not gonna use this another database for storing actual data. We're just gonna feature flag, but we kind of now configure that on staging with the intent that this is good enough to run that in the production, but we will not store any data on the production database yet. If this is the desire, we can even put that way, because then they kind of start thinking about the next step, how to prepare production configuration for that.
That seems fine to me.
Would it be an option if perhaps as a sort of, I don't know what to call it, temporary testing approach, whatever, we set up a different database name on the same database host as we have now? Because as far as I remember, our database migrations do have the permissions to create new databases, because we use that for Geo. So theoretically, what we could do is create a database called something like a GitLab HQ CI production, for example. And then we move some tables over there. That way, we still have the sort of ability to show what this would look like. It just happens to reside on the same host. I think the migration process will be more or less the same, because although in theory you could probably move data across database on the same host fairly easily, well, actually I think the process will be manual, because we can't replicate the entire database onto the same host, because we probably run out of disk space. But for that particular case, we could do it manually or something along those lines. Because that way we have something to show, but we're not bound by however long it takes for infrastructure to set up these hosts, and however long it takes for Omnibus, etc., to do their part.
I think it's all an option. I'm not sold on the objectives though. I'm not sold that if we go down this route, we will have learnt so much that it was a worthwhile exercise, given that it's not our long-term plan. And also not sold on it being something that will be visible to stakeholders in alleviating their concerns. I mean, it might, but I also kind of think, well, they're going to rightly challenge us and say, but why are you doing this? What has it accomplished? And then we'll say, well, we're doing it to show that we can, and it hasn't accomplished anything. I don't know. That's me being skeptical, but we might learn things from it. I'm not opposed to it.
I agree with you, Dylan. I mean, the advantage of doing it is more that we will be forced to set up monitoring, all that kind of stuff. But then if infrastructure is scratched, then maybe that's a good point either. I think the nature of this problem is that if we're successful, it's actually invisible, right? So from that point of view, I entirely agree.
I'm kind of worried that like if we even aim on like a single database, it's not that easier than like setting separate databases because of the first like amount of the connections. Probably we need separate PG bouncers configurations with the separate connection pools anyway. So there is like also the potential performance impact on the Postgres master that the Postgres main that we have today. So at least I think like it depends on what we want to achieve. Like if we want to validate that application functions, we can probably validate it in the development. If we want to kind of move forward with the infrastructure configuration, I'm more willing like to say that we should spend slightly more on having the proper database cluster setup, because it better resembles exactly how the thing's going to be running on the staging, and we have less things to change. And then on top of that, we could kind of start working on running migrations. But server, I'm not convinced that it gives us like a lot of benefits at this moment. Given also like the amount of the effort that we need to spend to actually make it happen. And I mean, it kind of really depends how infrastructure team can iterate on creating database clusters. If it's like 3 months, this is something I think that we should figure out how to speed up. Because if it's actually 3 months, then it's gonna be probably gonna start become a blocked pretty soon. And I know, Deron, that you started working on some of these monitoring changes. This is like probably an ideal example where we would benefit from having many databases, because we would start seeing that on the production system or like staging system if this actually works. So
Yeah,
this would be like
one
of the benefits.
Yeah,
having
that I agree with. We can actually test and see that. We can test logging and performance bar and various of the things. We can test dashboards in Grafana and see that they're all wired up correctly, because it's all stuff that's going to need to be added for the second database. So I'm fine with that part of the plan for moving CI instance variables. I think it's reasonable. The alternative with our stream replication is that we could configure the CI connections to go through separate PG bounces and to go to read-only connections to go to the CI cluster directly, because it'll already be a streaming replica of the original cluster. Like we can actually move connections around topologically so that writes are all still going to the same place, but they're going through different PG bounces and so on. We can do this well before we actually execute the migration. So that's also a path for us to say, like, we don't need to be fully ready to execute this migration before we can start seeing a whole bunch of the infrastructure unfold in production.
So how do we know where we are on provisioning the database cluster? Does anyone know?
I think we just need to check with Jose. I think there is somebody else, not Jose, who's actually working on the tooling to deploy database clusters, and I'm trying to find where I've seen this conversation.
I will drop a link in the Slack because I've seen this happening somewhere, and I'll figure out where.
Thanks. Yeah, just making sure, because in the past I've had infra tell me you didn't open an issue, or you didn't tell us. So
Actually, I'm looking at this Omnibus MR, and it's looking pretty decent for the configuration.
yeah, it's pretty good. One down, one to go. I think charts, it's probably going to be a little bit harder, but should be all right once someone gets to it. Do you want to talk about number 6, Camille? Or we're over time, actually.
Let's skip that. Let's finish. It's already like we are overdue.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the discussion. Have a good day.